Well, thank you all for being packed house. Excellent. All right. So, Texas versus D.C. We might have some things to talk about today. You think that Texas is in the crosshairs when it comes to the current administration? I'm Brian Phillips. If you didn't meet me this morning, I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Really appreciate you all being here today to talk about this. Got a lot to get through. So, I will do very short bios. Of course, you probably know most of the folks up here. Of course, the Commissioner Dawn Buckingham, who is putting on quite the fight up with D.C. So we're very thankful for her to be here for the General Land Office. Sorry. Of course, Senator Hughes, who has been an absolute champion, conservative champion for us on a number of issues, was just up at the Supreme Court fighting D.C. there. We'll talk about those issues. Paul Dans, who is single-handedly fighting the deep state from his perch at the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025, and then Phil Wegman, who has the unenviable task of talking to the press, Joe Biden's press secretary every day. So we'll get his thoughts about how things work out in D.C. So thank you all for being here. So, ladies first, we'll start with Commissioner Buckingham. There's just about every single issue that Texas fights with D.C. about. So I want to give a little bit of an intro. So we're going to talk today about the actual fights that we're getting into with D.C. and all the various issues that we do. But I also like to talk about, and this is one of the reasons why I brought Paul and Phil here today, is that Texas does things differently. We're unique, obviously. We do things very differently than a lot of other states, and we do things in a way where we actually get things done. We're productive. That's another reason why I want to have the senator here as well, is because we actually pass legislation. We pass legislation that is meaningful to people. So I want to get into some of that, whereas D.C. doesn't really do that at all. I have a very cynical view that I think that D.C. is broken from within. Luckily, my congressman is Chip Roy, so he's up there fighting that every single day and making that point. So anyway, so we'll get into that a little bit. But we'll start with Commissioner Buckingham. You know, the one question I have is, I mean, there's so many things, whether it's emission standards, clearly the border is a huge issue and is one of the things that you're fighting on. You know, do you think that Texas is being singled out and being picked on because we're a conservative state and because we're politically relevant, obviously, in what's going on this year? Or do you think it's just that Texas is constantly standing up for our rights and asserting our authority and our sovereignty?
Well, and I think it's both. Can you turn this on?
We get some sound.
Okay, I think we got it now. I think it's both, honestly. We by spirit are independent nature, standing up, fighting against tyranny from the very beginning. But D.C. is absolutely picking on us because we are the shining star, not just for the country, but for the entire world, in what good conservative policies work and what the Texas miracle is. And so the General Land Office, many of you all don't know, the last remaining entity of the Republic of Texas, the keepers of maps, the guardians of Texas history, but literally the tip of the spear in defending our border, defending oil and gas, and defending our history against what the radical left wants to do. And we stand and fight that every day.
Of all the issues that you're working on right now, what is the most important issue?
Well, the single most important issue to get right is the Alamo, which is not what you expected here, and I'll talk to you about some of the other big things we're doing.
We're still defending it to this day.
We are, and we are going to be darn sure that that building is standing in 500 years, and we are teaching our liberty-loving, line in the sand, liberty or death history to our children for generations. That's the most important thing to get right for me today. But that being said, we are finding a million ways to defend oil and gas. We are suing the Biden administration over their LNG stuff. We are coming up with creative poolings to get around some of their endangered species things. We are being transformational in produced water, which the earthquakes from reinjection of that water is probably a tool that EPA could use to shut down oil and gas in the state. We are getting them to carbon neutrality with hundreds of thousands of acres of carbon sequestration leases out in the Gulf. We are blocking their transmission lines for the 860 square mile of wind farms they want to put out into the Gulf. You will notice no one bid on their sale for lease for the lines that were supposed to come across Texas because we told them hell no. And so we also told them come and try and take our wire, suing them over that, and they're having no luck there. It was really great to be able to help DPS and the military department declare those islands in the Rio Grande, Texas, so that we could take away away their law enforcement free zones for the cartels, get rid of their stashes of drugs and weapons.
Did you get to personally plant the Texas flag in the middle of that island?
You know, I didn't because they were too dangerous at the time. But I have the first Texas flag that was done. And the first island we did, someone came and planted a Venezuelan flag on it within a week. Within a week, and I'll tell you that didn't stay up very long. So, but no, but it's just fun being a part of the fight and aggressively going after it every day.
Senator Hughes, you were literally in D.C. fighting the fight. Will you tell our folks about? I'm sure there's a lot of folks in there who know that, but for those who don't, tell us why you were in D.C. and at the Supreme Court recently.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It was about big tech, our friends at big tech, right? And so Texas, as in so many ways, was the first state to do something about big tech censorship, right? Facebook, YouTube, which is Google, that's the new public square. That's where people go to hash it out, to have to express their ideas. And we recognize that a handful of San Francisco big tech oligarchs have made themselves the gatekeepers of free speech. They decide what messages get out, what messages don't. And so Texas filed a bill and passed a bill that said, no, you can't do that. We passed it in 2021. I was honored to carry that bill. So many people in this room were involved in getting that done. Folks in the private sector, these guys over here like Ron and Andy, and so many people at this think tank, just putting good information out there, Heritage Foundation, others. So Texas passed that law. Of course, we were challenged. It was before the U.S. Supreme Court a couple of weeks ago. Went there for the arguments. And so the last time we were there was for the heartbeat bill. That one turned out really well. So we're optimistic that our second trip this time to the Supreme Court will be good. But the bill says, these big tech platforms, the huge ones, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, now X, they are common carriers. Just like your phone company can't deny you service because of your religion, the utility company doesn't cut off your power because of the church you go to or don't go to. These guys are the same. They ought to be treated that way. And this law says you're common carriers. And tell us what the rules are. How many of you have been knocked off? And I won't tell you why. You can't get an answer. It's so frustrating. So tell us what the rules are. Give us an appeal process. And by the way, the bill says if they violate your freedom of expression, your First Amendment rights, based on the First Amendment protected speech, and they knock you off, you can sue them in a Texas court. If you win, you get your attorney's fees, and they got to put you back online. Now, to be clear, if we're talking about content that's lewd, lascivious, excessively violent, of course, that's not protected. They take care of that. They must take care of that. But this is the first law in the country to hold them accountable. They didn't like it too much. They sued us. I'll drop one footnote here. I'm talking too much, but about our friends at Big Tech. We're free market people. We're business people. We love innovation, but we should be aware. Big Tech is trying to buy the conservative movement. Let me say again, Big Tech is trying to buy the conservative movement. Look at the money they're spreading around at think tanks, at interest groups. Look at the law firms they're hiring. We had a hard time finding lawyers to file amicus briefs on our behalf because Big Tech had hired up all the law firms that normally are on the conservative side. Let me say, they have not bought TPPF. They have not bought, they're not for sale. They're not, and we're glad. Yeah. And Heritage is not, but so many of our friends are, so be aware. So we're pushing back, we're fighting, and we're going to beat them.
And how do you think the oral argument went, and when do you expect a decision?
Interesting issue. It wasn't left versus right. Among the Republican appointees, they were split. The Democrats were kind of split. Big Tech, these guys, ironically, are claiming the protection of the First Amendment. They're saying, oh, this is our First Amendment right to censor you. Ironically, they are violating the First Amendment while draping themselves in it. But they can do that. That's free speech. That's the first. They can make the argument. I think they overreached. I think they went too far. They tried to block the whole law. And the reason they did that, they don't want us to go through the discovery process. In a lawsuit, we get to ask them questions. We get to look at their documents, just like we made BlackRock come to Texas and testify under oath. They don't want that. But now, if the Supreme Court lets this case move forward, we're going to peer into the keyhole. And we're going to see what they've been doing and just who they've been blocking and why. They're scared to death of that. If we get that discovery and the Supreme Court and the public see what they've been up to, we're going to win.
That's excellent. All right, let's move to the swamp now with our folks. Paul, we'll start with you. For those of you who have heard about the deep state or are very concerned about the deep state, well, Paul is the executive director of Project 2025. I encourage all of you to go to project2025.org, sign up if you want to be part of the movement that's going to rid this country of the deep state and restore the executive branch back to its constitutional purpose. He's the man leading that charge. So, Paul, take us through kind of what you're working on with Project 2025, how you're recruiting folks to come in and restore the constitutional balance with the executive branch.
Yeah, and I guess I want to first say thank you for welcoming us to Texas and the TPPF.
Howdy.
Yeah, I came in the room today, and two things struck me. There was a woman telling another, what's the next panel? And she says to the one woman, it's Texas first, the feds, and basically she's like, I'll take that bet any day. But it's that attitude that, and then another gentleman came up and he's like, welcome to Texas, and I was like, we come here for a spiritual renewal, and this is the safest of the safe spaces, if you will. But I'm listening to the senator here talk, and he says, well, Texas was the first. And in a way, you guys are the first state, if you will, because this is the state that always stands up against tyranny. And with the Alamo, that's a lesson that all of us, I don't know if you realize, I think you're, 20 million Texans, but I think that there's about 120 million plus Texans. They just don't know it yet. People, and I'm not saying they're all moving here, but
moving to Austin,
we, as someone who lived 22 plus years in New York City, I think you realize how many of your fellow citizens really have this Texas attitude, but are suffering under a kind of a tyranny. And you guys have stood up for it, and you're really the beacon of hope, really has to shine outward. What we're doing in Washington now with Project 2025, I'm from the Heritage Foundation, and I wanted to try this out with the audience, but yeah, I'm here from Washington, and I'm here to help. That's exactly what I'm not
the kind
here
of
to
audience
do.
engagement you want.
The point of it is no one in Washington is actually there to help. And you guys have to help yourself, and I think you got that loud and clear. The tyranny that's coming out of the Biden administration has been a long time coming. We are actually at a 100-year mark for what is known as the progressive era, and I submit to you that we're going to be shutting that chapter down in 2025. Our country is going on its 250th birthday in 2 years, and we have to get back to the constitutional moorings of it, which with the growth of what we call the administrative state, the so-called fourth branch of government, this is really where the tyranny comes from, unelected bureaucracy. And with Project 2025, we have now come together as 100 leading conservative groups to really put personnel and policy recommendations for the next president, conservative president. So, in line with Texas, not surprisingly, TPPF was the first state think tank to join our coalition. And that might be in a little
now over 100, by the way.
It's 100,
yeah.
And many of us had served in the Trump administration and realized, if you guys want to take this country back, you got to take your government back. And the only way you take your government back is by personnel. That is, as you all have walked through life, realizing that people make the difference. And what we need to do is, we're not going to do it with the same Washington retreads. We need a lot more Texans, if you will, cowboys, like frontier women up in in what we call the nation's capital, but really putting that sense back in Washington. So how do we do that? We're a recruiting effort, but we're also training conservatives to let you know the traps that are set for you when you walk into the place. And I can go a little bit more into what we're facing, but
I'll come back to you.
Yeah. It's just a pleasure to be with you today.
It's a lot of fun to attack the media. So we've had Phil now, because conservatives love that. Now, Phil works for Real Clear. He has a bunch of affiliations. Real Clear Politics, formerly Washington Examiner. So I'm not going to say you're one of us. I won't do that to you here on stage. But he has the unenviable task, like I said, of trying to ask and get coherent answers from Joe Biden's press secretary every day, which is very difficult. And the one question I've been waiting to ask, and I haven't done the show before the show, I've been waiting to ask is, you hear the bravado, you hear all of the fights that we're in, we're fighting back as hard as we can against this abomination of an administration. Do they care? Do they know what's going on down here and all the fights that we're putting up, and do they care?
Well, certainly they care now that it's an election year. So this is a small anecdote. It's not, 12 angry men or anything, but I remember during the early days of the Biden administration, I put this question to the president. I asked him, is there a crisis at the border, sir? Because we had seen the numbers increasing according to Border Patrol. He said, no, we can handle it, God willing. And then a few weeks later, I felt kind of bad, but I caught Jen Psaki, the former White House press secretary, in an awkward moment. She said, in a verbal flub, that there was a crisis at the border. And so I followed up and I said, what did you mean by that? And she replied, well, we don't mean crisis at the border. What we mean is a challenge at the border. And that's how it was. Every single day for 3 years, from the president all the way down, that was the language. Love it, hate it, that's just a fact. Until the Biden administration gave their blessing to the Senate bipartisan border package, which died as quickly as it was born. But on a Friday night, President Biden put out a statement. It was written, and it was released, and suddenly he said that there's a crisis at the border, and it changed. And it changed in large part because it's an election year. And, obviously that border package failed, and so there's sort of two possibilities here for the president. Now that he's admitted it's a crisis, he can either take executive action, which begs the question, why didn't you take that action previously? Or he can do nothing. And it seems that that's very much, the case currently. But
is there, we're obviously challenging them in a very direct and very public way. Obviously, the governor is out there, asserting Texas authority. Is there any discussion about that specifically?
Yeah, absolutely.
In circles at the White House?
Well, the commissioner said that the federal government is picking on Texas. From my vantage point, certainly Texas is punching back. And I've got to tell you, in that room, you have shaped the consciousness of every single reporter there, because now the border is no longer this thing that happens really far away. With some of the work that Abbott has done, in particular sending migrants to some of these metropolitan areas like New York, Chicago, it's no longer this sort of question of something that happens in someone else's backyards. No, now it's happening in their backyard. And so with Senate Bill 4, this is front and center. And as President Biden is, he was in Dallas last night, he's in Houston tonight, not doing campaign events, just doing fundraisers. This is what's top of mind. You guys are forcing a question. This is the debate, and it could be the defining debate going into the election year.
So that's the one big issue I definitely want to get everybody's opinion on. We could probably spend this entire panel talking about the border, but I do at least want to get one round of reaction to this. One of the crazy statistics I saw is that the number one issue coming out of the exit polls in New Hampshire was the border and immigration. So in Texas, it's issue 1, 2, and 3, and then maybe a little bit of the economy, but we have a pretty resilient Texas here. So on the border, Commissioner, let me just throw it out there. What do we do? We got 7 million to 10 million that have come across in the last 3 years. You have an election year, and so Biden's finally paying attention to what's going on down there. What steps we heard from the governor yesterday, so he outlined that. But from your perspective and from your chair there at the commission, what steps is Texas taking to assert its authority to secure the border, and at the same time with its left hand fighting the administration?
Well, let's roll time back a little bit, because while Biden doesn't really want us to count how many people are coming across the border, he sure wants to get to 270 electoral votes. Now, within his first 12 hours of being sworn in as president, what he did was to be sure that the illegal immigrants were counted as part of the census. The census then determines the electoral college numbers. The liberal states that are hemorrhaging population because they're moving here, because our policies bring wealth and prosperity, and their policies clearly do not, they needed to be reinforced. So instead of losing congressional seats and losing delegates for the Electoral College, they're gaining them. So that's what this is all about. That's what the processing center that they're trying to do along the border is. We are fighting every way we can in Texas, spending, I think this last biennium, over $4 billion on border security as a state. But I'll be honest, it's sort of like standing in the Gulf of Mexico and stopping the waves. You can stop a wave kind of right where you are, We have managed to redirect traffic along the border, but at the end of the day, we need to elect Trump, because it is only by having President Trump as our president and a change at the federal level that these are going to stop. When he was president, we had the most secure border we've ever had in our history, and we've just, it's the policies that are luring people here that are driving them at the end of the day.
Senator, I don't know if you got whiplash like the rest of us over the last 2 weeks with SB 4 being enforced and then not enforced and then kind of enforced, and you know, I've got the lawyers in our office trying to explain to me all this procedural stuff which I don't really understand. So where are we on SB 4? Are we enforcing it? Are we not enforcing it? And then what are you all doing, especially from the Senate and the legislature, to assert our authority as a state to be able to protect our border?
Yeah, I'm blessed to represent about 1 million people in Northeast Texas, and one of my beautiful cities is Texarkana. When I'm in Texarkana, I have to clarify which border I'm talking about. But for today, we'll talk about our southern border with Mexico, the one we're most concerned about, and we love our Texas.
We have Midland. Do we have Midland? Where do we have?
That's right.
Yeah, I know we got Midland in that.
And so. We in Texas have been aware for a long time, trying to deal with it. It's been frustrating. It's been a crisis. But it seems like nobody else realized it or cared about it or was really paying attention. But now it has gotten so bad. And Governor Abbott, my goodness, we've got to give Governor Abbott credit for faithfully sticking to the plan, following the law. Many folks in our movement have told us, forget about the law, forget about the Constitution, just deal with it. But we're the rule of law people, right? We're the rule of law people. They ignore the law, we follow the law. And we can win following the law, following the Constitution. Governor Abbott steadily set the table for that, struck at the right time, and as you say, the administration has found responding. So I'm just thankful that people around America get it, and that, as you say, in New Hampshire, it's the #1 issue. I'm so glad that people get it. I was getting kind of discouraged. I thought, do people not care? Are they so moved by legitimate humanitarian concerns and compassion for folks? Are we so moved by that we've, as a country, just given up on wanting to have secure borders? I know we haven't, and I'm encouraged America has not either. And I believe this issue is what is going to help propel President Trump back to the White House. It's also, again, it's a terrible thing that's happening, but the awareness being raised is working. And you see what's happening in the Rio Grande Valley. While the left tries to paint this as a racial issue, as a racist issue, our friends in the Rio Grande Valley, many of them of Hispanic origin, are voting in larger and larger numbers for Republicans because they're conservative, pro-life, pro-family, patriotic, they're entrepreneurial, they're pro-military, and this border crisis is driving voters, citizens in the Rio Grande Valley into the arms of conservatives. So we're thankful to see that happen.
And now, Paul, your current boss is my old boss who took the demotion to leave TPPF and go to the Heritage Foundation. I'm just kidding, Kevin. We love you. But obviously he's as aware as anybody else. I mean, having lived in Texas, for a long time and dealt with these issues at TPPF. How is the border issue being debated there in D.C.? I mean, do you see? And we'll talk about the brokenness of D.C. and maybe get into the border bill a little bit later. But I mean, that struggle? I mean, the border's the #1 issue. What's the view from D.C.?
Well, Kevin's an example of a Texan riding to the rescue up to us in D.C. So thank you for loaning us Kevin, my boss. And we make that foremost in our projection of policy at the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025. Look, the reality is that the federal government, we can get more into it, is a permanent government in Washington. It's run by bureaucrats, and the president has very little control of it. There's 2.2 million federal workers. The president appoints 4,000. That's 1 to 500 if you're going to start trying to manage these folks. The liberals have gamed this all out. So when it comes to things like immigration, we're conservatives. We think about God, country, and family. We're in private enterprise. We don't focus on government. Well, government is not like your teeth, where they say, like, ignore your teeth and they're going to go away. Government's exactly the opposite. You ignore it, it gets bigger and bigger. And the liberals, they built this thing. This whole progressive state was built by them. So they have gamed the system. They've put, immigration finds its corner in all these parts of the federal government. Well, they have their people put in those important posts that determine the policy. So you don't even realize that very important migratory decisions are being made by these arcane offices. And what's more is that they've made sure that no political control can come over that. But we need a group of people who can come up and rewire the government to put political control.
And now, Phil, the commissioner and the senator brought up politics, so I'm gonna. It's not coming from me, but I'll piggyback off of what they said. I mean, how big? I mean, this obviously isn't emerging as a huge issue. You brought it up a little bit, but is this really? I mean, I guess for to the benefit maybe of conservatives going into November, is this going to be the #1 issue, or do you think that the Democrats and Biden and the campaign will try to push other issues up front?
Yeah, if it's not the #1 issue, certainly it's 2 or 3 or 4. I mean, there's a long time between now and November. We don't know what's going to happen, of course. But yeah, of course.
Biden might not even be the nominee by the end of the vote.
Certainly.
Some conspiracy theories.
Yeah, certainly like immigration and the current crisis is one that plays to Donald Trump's strengths. Obviously, this was a central issue for him in 2016. It's going to continue to be going forward. I think that what we're seeing in the polls currently is that in the Real Clear Politics average, Donald Trump leads Joe Biden by 2 points. That's within the margin of error. That's a coin flip. That's a horse race. Yes, things are going to change in the coming weeks and months, but that never happened before in 2020, and that was a very close race as well. So I would expect Donald Trump to play to his strengths, to continue to make an argument about border security, and frankly, to try and put Biden and his campaign on their back foot, and just see how many times this administration can try to explain away the situation on the southern border by saying, well, we were left a broken system. That worked for the first 6 months or a year, right? You're new in town, you're trying to figure things out, you inherited a problem, perhaps. They've been in there for 4 years. They own this. And so it's not going to be enough for the Biden administration to say that Republicans aren't playing ball in Congress, or that, they won't pass comprehensive immigration reform.
Well, the record's pretty clear, they reversed a lot of the Trump-era policies, right?
Yeah, to Paul's point a second ago, within, I think, the first 2 or 3 days, President Biden reversed Remain in Mexico. He reversed, was on his way to reversing Title 42. At one point, one of my colleagues, who's a little bit more friendly towards the administration, asked the president during his first press conference if one of the reasons why there was an uptick in immigration, illegal immigration across the southern border, was because of the perception that he was such a nice guy. And look, I know we kind of laugh about that, but the thing is, look, polling shows that 80% of the country blames Washington, D.C. for the current problem. Yeah. And obviously 75% of Republicans, they're going to blame the federal government. 37% of Democrats, according to Gallup, are blaming the federal government for their inaction. That's a sizable chunk, and that's an opportunity for the former president.
So Phil is doing a great job of segueing into all of my next questions, so I promise we didn't plan this beforehand. But I do want to talk about that, and I want to get the last 15 minutes or so that we have on this panel, and then I want to get to everybody's questions, because I know we're going to have a lot of really good questions for our panel. We do things differently here, Commissioner Buckingham. Like, is it the culture? We get things done. We have debates. We have very serious debates in the legislature over all kinds of issues, and we have right, left, and sometimes we even pass bipartisan legislation here. Is it just the culture of Texas, or is it because we're a state versus D.C.? And then I want you to comment a little bit on, do we need to do more, in the line of what Paul's doing to try and restore things in D.C. so we can actually get stuff done, or is it worth it to just throw up our hands and say, look, we're going to take care of Texas?
Well, as goes Texas, goes our country, and as our country goes the world. So our goal, our role is to stand up and fight. And yes, we are different because we were founded by a very different group of people. When you look at the Republic of Texas, when you look at our heritage, we were actually at an event in this building last year, about 1,000 people in that ballroom, and it was a lunch, and we got up and we did the pledge to the American flag, and then we did the pledge to the Texas flag. And I happened to be at a table with 8 other people from different states. They're like, I don't even know if our state has a pledge. And the entire ballroom knew the pledge to our Texas flag. So we are fundamentally different. We think differently. And if you weren't born here and you move here, Texas moves into you. So we appreciate that some of y'all got here as fast as you could. Some of us, I'm a 9th generation Texan, but Texas moves into you. Our pride, our spirit, our independence, Texas. We are just fundamentally differently wired. And it is, of course, as leaders, our duty is to fix what is broken, not just at home, but nationally as well.
Senator, does it bug you that Texas is that Washington is so dysfunctional? I mean, shouldn't we have a federal government that can get things done and doesn't have to do everything by omnibus or CR or by executive action? I mean, the states are doing their part. I mean, obviously Texas is leading on a lot of issues, but doesn't it bug you a little bit that Washington seems so hopelessly broken?
It's frustrating. We in this room realize how blessed we are and how God has had his hand on this country, not because we deserve it, but because of his grace, the prosperity we enjoy, even with Biden inflation, as tough as things are. We are all so much better off economically than the vast majority. Anybody, you're right, man, so much better off. The poorest among us is rich compared to anybody else just about in the world. The liberty, the prosperity, the opportunities, the free speech. I won't exercise too much today, don't worry, but the free speech, the right to vote, all these things, you get it, that we have our blessings from the Lord, and we have a great system that our founders gave us, and it's the framework is there, but man, it's frustrating. And there's some great people. We're talking about some congressmen from Texas. We have some great people there serving. I'm still so excited about it. Don't you love our new Speaker of the House? Aren't you excited to have a guy like that running the U.S. House, maybe the best ever? And so we got some great people there, but for some reason, man, it's just breaking and it's not working. So we hope that the states, as laboratories of democracy, will keep setting that example. And in Texas, we're blessed to have this system where we have a part-time citizen legislature. I can't say much for the caliber of people that East Texas is sending to the legislature, but I'll tell you this, that system where we are part-time legislators and full-time citizens. I don't live in Austin. I live in Tyler, and the members here live around the state, and we come to Austin for a few months and make laws, and then we go back home. And we live under the laws we made, and we have to go back to work, back to our old jobs, and face people at church and at Walmart and at football games, and to give account. And, you know, U.S. Congress was once a part-time citizen legislature. Every state was. But all the big states, I mean, they think they're big states, half our size. All the bigger states, you know, they've gone to a full-time legislature. I think one of the reasons Texas enjoys a lean, responsive, relatively inexpensive, one of the 10 lowest tax burdens in the country, is because of that part-time citizen legislature and our 140-day sessions, usually, that make it hard to pass a bill. So the big stuff usually gets done. A lot of stuff takes a while, but I think that's one of the factors, having a part-time citizen legislature. Both are important. And I'll say this, too, and this is maybe counterintuitive. We have the aisle in the middle of the Texas Senate, Texas House. I'm not saying y'all are on the right and y'all are on the left. I know where we all are here today. But as you know, in every legislative body in the Western world, from Parliament to U.S. Congress to every state legislature, conservatives on the right, liberals on the left, Republicans, Democrats. You know, we don't sit that way in Texas, right? You pick a seat that you like based on your seniority. I've got a Democrat next to me, got a Republican behind me. And most of the bills we pass, pass with bipartisan, if not unanimous support. They're good government, common sense, passing a budget, keeping the trains running on time. There are those things we differ over. I tend to carry most of those, or a lot of those, and there are things we differ over, and on those we win because we have the majority. We're a conservative state. But we don't hate the other side. We work with them. We listen to them. They get to represent their districts. I hope that answer is not too vague, but those are two things we have that Washington does not have, and I think that, by God's grace, has set us apart.
I think it's important to point out that you do pass a lot of bills in a bipartisan fashion, particularly in the Senate. So what you're saying is you're not in any hurry to run for Congress and commute 8 months a year to go up to D.C. to do nothing?
I see those guys at the airport sometime, man. They look strung out. I feel sorry for them. I mean, they're tired, strung out.
I see Chip. I want to give him a hug.
I hate it for him.
I feel for him. So, Paul, what's stopping you from moving to Texas? You've got family here.
I was going to say my twin brother here, identical. So by some genetic extension, I am a Texan. I haven't figured that out, but
I will ask you a substantive question. I will.
It's funny. I did marry a Southerner, though, as he did. So we basically got to these parts. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and my wife's originally from Charlotte. But we were both up in New York, and that's where our family's immigrant. We were the first generation and my siblings and I to speak English in our household. So, but Texas to us, growing up as kids, was always, you know, the land of cowboys, the oil, you know, the Wildcats. This idea of like unchained freedom.
The world
and
champion Texas
prosperity.
Rangers.
Well, not so much, but yeah, there you go. But you know, it's really important.
Sorry, Houston Astros fans. I apologize.
We see what we've done here at Heritage is with our coalition is really lay out a grand vision that I think conservatives across the country need to get behind. But the bottom
I want to stop you right there because I want to get into that. That's what I want to talk about. Is what does that look like if the executive branch, if you guys are successful in building this army and executing the playbook, what does that look like for the executive branch? What is the vision there that you're hopeful that we can, in terms of restoring its constitutional role? What does that actually look like?
Yeah, and I should say as a disclaimer, we are not the Trump campaign. They're separate. We are a group of conservatives that came together as Texans do, self-starting, basically with Kevin's direction in 22, laying out throwing down the marker what conservatives want to see, and really organizing, because realizing that when a president gets into power, or one day her power is going to diminish from day one, and that's when you really have to hit the ground running. So you can't do that preparation in a 3-month period between the election and inauguration. You have to do this way in advance. So what we hope to see, and I think what we will see, is a lot of this work that we've been working will be hopefully transplanted into the next administration. We're nonpartisan, but I would say in my personal capacity, I second what the commissioner here said. There's only one guy who's going to turn this country around, and it's a stark decision. I think there's a basketball thing kicking off this afternoon, but we talk about a 2-minute buzzer. We are at the 2-minute buzzer for this country. I mean, there is no more sitting on the sidelines. As the senator was saying, every one of us is the unwitting beneficiary of this prosperity that was given to us by untold generations that came before us. The shared sacrifice. It is our time to go and put it on the line. And if you're not willing to do that, and most Texans are willing to do that, you shouldn't even be in this game. It's rough and tumble up in Washington, but the time for kind of shirking or like laying on the sidelines is gone. But we need to basically, I'll make a plug. Maybe you're not able to come serve in Washington, but you know somebody who can. And go to project2025.org. You no longer have to have connections in Washington, you just need to have commitment. And we need to fill up that 4,000 person register and then some to take back control of the administrative state.
Thank you. Phil, are we missing something? I know we're in the bubble here in Texas, and we obviously are very proud of being in Texas. Are we missing something? Do they have, you're lurking around the White House and you see people coming in and out. Do they have, do Republicans come over? Do they have talks? Is there more bipartisanship going on there? Is it not as hopeless? Is there some hope there that potentially Congress it may have to get worse before it gets better, but is there anything that we're not seeing that they're kind of making progress on?
I don't think there's a lot of bipartisan appetite currently, and I think that's because of the environment that we're in. We're in an election year, so if you looked at President Biden's State of the Union address, again, even if you loved it or hated it, it's hard to disagree that was a campaign speech, and that was not a traditional address about how the country was doing. Instead, it was a reflection on the past achievements of his first 4 years, notably, Build Back Better and the CHIPS Act, and then an argument for what he was going to do if he was given 4 more years. So currently, we're in divided government. I don't think there's appetite for that much. If you look at what these guys are doing just to get a continuing resolution across the finish line, or if you look at the current debate over foreign aid and Speaker Johnson holding the line and demanding that border changes be made, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of room for these guys to come together. And frankly, some of the more conservative members of Congress who I talk to, are fine with that. You know, they don't mind gridlock if they're playing a prevent defense, and I think that's what we're going to see all the way until November.
And I know you cover the White House, not Congress, but you know, the senator alluded to Speaker Johnson, and it feels like things have calmed down a little bit. I mean, there was a huge food fight, you know, for a couple months there, and of course Chip Roy's name comes up again. He was probably leading part of that. But have things calmed down a little bit, at least on the conservative side?
Things have calmed down to an extent with the announcement that Representative Ken Buck of Colorado is going to be retiring. That means that Speaker Johnson has exactly a 1-vote margin. Of course, because of what the House Freedom Caucus did to oust John Boehner 6-7 years ago, now there's a playbook to get rid of a House Speaker. Basically, you bring a petition to vacate the chair, then there's that food fight that you alluded to. But I think that for the most part, you know, the different factions of the Republican Party on the House side, that they all realize that, you know, Johnson is an honest arbiter, that they're invested in his success. And I think that the real takeaway, other than sort of the, you know, nerdy parliamentary coalition building here, is, like, Donald Trump rebuilt the Republican Party in his own image. And there might have been debates and some folks who were going kicking and screaming previously during his administration, but for the most part, he has set the parameters for the debate, and now there seems to be, you know, a more singular mission focus, and at least for now, that's kept the peace on the right.
Excellent. Well, we've done a couple of rounds. We have set the table here. I know we've got standing room only, which is fantastic. I'm so excited that everybody's in here. We'll probably push for this to be a keynote next year. We'll have to talk about this. So I do want to get to questions. I definitely want to get to questions here. We'll start right here. Oh, wait, sorry. We'll start in the back and then we'll go here. All right, go. Sorry. I caught Nikki completely by surprise because I really want to get to questions. I want to hear what everybody has to say.
Oh, okay.
That's right. That's true.
So I know nobody asked, but my pronouns are Texan. And I demand
Texas
you address.
and yeehaw.
Yeah, and I demand you address me as such.
You want to apologize for taking this land or anything?
Yeah, well, I really appreciate Dawn's bio. I just took a look really quick, and she said she was one of the earliest settlers and a 7th-generation Texan. I think you get a lot of woke Texans that like to brag how long we've been here, and they say they're 4th generation or 5th generation because they don't want to have anything to do with the Civil War. But so my question is, how far can we defy federal government rulings, court rulings, because we're already starting to do that on the immigration front, and so I wonder how long we can further that along to defend our strength and sovereignty and what makes us strong. How far do you see us defying federal court rulings?
Well, clearly, if you look in other states that like legalized marijuana, which is illegal by federal law, clearly you can do whatever you want. If you look at how the Biden administration disregards the rule of law every single day, there's your precedent. I personally believe in what we're doing right now to protect our border. Article 1, Section 10 of our Constitution says that if the federal government is not guaranteeing the Republican form of government, is not able to protect you from an invasion, you are allowed to protect yourself, which was the core argument against Senate Bill 4 and how it's different this time as it goes through the court system than the Arizona case was a few years ago. Because I think we have firmly established, when you have millions of people coming across your border, and the numbers that are thrown around, I mean, the General Land Office stewards 13 million acres across the state. Besides being the largest mineral owner, we're also the largest landowner in the state. We have hundreds of thousands of acres all along the border. What I can tell you is the mass of humanity that comes across the border is many, many multiples of the numbers that we hear every day. The people that they touch are the people that they count. I would estimate, just on what we see on our game cameras, because we do agricultural leases, hunting leases, all those types of things, that it's 20 to 50 times that number. So we are going to stand and fight and do whatever we think we can get away with to defend our border. And honestly, our best case scenario is if the federal government will just uphold their duty to defend our border, because that is their fundamental duty, and they fail at that every single day.
Senator, that's a great question. I mean, we can fight this in the press, we can fight this in the courts, but at some point it's got to end somewhere, right? So how far does this go?
It does, and I'll just say this, and of course, Commissioner's right. The great news is we're winning in court. We're doing so well in court that you may have seen that Senator Schumer encouraged the U.S. courts to change the rules about where federal lawsuits can file. Did y'all see this? Because they don't like us filing in front of conservative, constitution-loving judges. They're trying to change the rules about where lawsuits can be filed, trying to change 100-year-old processes. Now, they're going to lose. They're going to lose that. But the good news is we're winning. You know, for years it seems like as conservatives we got outlawed. We always seemed to lose in court. It was frustrating. That's not happening today like it was before. We are blessed with conservative judges who follow the Constitution. I don't mean conservative activists. I just mean judges who apply the law. That's all we need. We don't need a conservative hack. We just want a fair judge, and we win. So there's a lot of encouragement there.
Vince, go ahead. You got your question? Right up front. Yeah, we're going right here.
Hi, y'all. Appreciate y'all being here. Appreciate everyone being here. I'm from Tarrant County, Fort Worth, Texas. Mona and myself. I thank you very much. Tarrant County, let's hear it. Yeah. Don, I want to address one thing you said, and then I've got a question for you and Brian. You mentioned how as Texas goes, so does the country, so goes the world. I'll take it one step further. As Tarrant County goes, so goes Texas, so goes the country, so goes the world. So you guys keep your eyes on Tarrant County and help us out down there. Brian and I'm going to call you Don. I'm sorry.
The other Brian.
Anyway, yeah, this other Brian. Both been state representatives for. We've talked about how wonderful Texas is and how you ought to move here, and I believe all that. And I was born and raised here. It's just an amazing place. Yet we have as much deep state, I believe, as D.C. does, or is getting there. We have three-party system, whether we realize it or not. We have the Democrats, we have the conservative Christian Republicans, and we have the establishment Republicans, or the uniparty. And there is a battle going on. We saw that at this last election. We got some runoffs we've got to take care of. But that's just one step. That's just one part of it. What's to keep we may not have the same House Speaker, God willing. He may not even be the next representative. But what's to keep the next guy from taking the Democrats and 20 Republicans and doing the same thing over again? And I realize you're in different roles now, but you've lived there. We've got to change that here in Texas. We have a bright star, but that star has shadow on it, and we've got to take care of it. We've got to make the difference.
Commissioner, don't you miss the Senate and having to answer questions like this?
I do miss the Senate. I love my posse, although I love what I'm doing more. But yes, Senator Hughes, would you like to?
Vince, you're right. And I'll say this, I'm not from Tarrant County, but we are thankful for the reddest urban county in the country, not just in Texas. Thank God for Tarrant County. Y'all got to hold the line and keep pushing. And we're glad you are. We're thankful for what you're doing. And I'll just say this, I was in the House for a while and enjoying being in the Senate now. And everybody up there works for the people and works for the voters. And so people respond. I mean, politicians respond. I mean, one way or the other. Either we listen to you when you communicate with us, or you vote us out. It takes a while sometimes, and I know they're going to send me home one of these days, I'm sure. Well, I'll leave voluntarily before you have to do that. But ultimately, we're thankful the system works. And I'll say this on the agency side. As far as the deep state stuff, we are so blessed, and this may sound like a diversion, but it's important. We have the sunset process in Texas. So every state agency, every state program has to come under review every 12 years, and if we don't find a reason to keep it, it goes away. We have ended tons of agencies and bureaucracies. That's one thing that protects us. We have some systemic things in place. So we don't have these. We don't have the fourth headless branch of the federal government with all those agencies with all that power. In Texas, they're kept on a shorter leash, but we have to watch it. We totally have to watch it. And yeah, ultimately, the voters are going to decide, and the voters are going to make choices. And the way our districts are drawn now, on the Republican and Democratic side, the primary voters tend to choose the winner, right? And, where I live, whatever idiot wins the Republican primary is going to win in the fall. That's me for now. I'm thankful for it. But, yeah, the voters are going to have to stay engaged, and that's what you're doing.
But the legislature chooses the Speaker of the House, and that's who's voting on that. And our Republicans have said, we don't want Democratic chairs, and yet there's a group that just don't care about what we want.
Well, I know that when I was in the House, I was on the wrong side. I was on the losing side of about every speaker race, including my own. So I'm not an expert on speaker races. But again, folks are going to respond to the will of the voters.
Do you want to announce anything?
Folks
today,
are going to respond.
Senator?
Thank you. Folks are going to respond to the will of the voters. I really do believe that. Let's talk more. And I love you and I trust you, but I think folks are going to respond to the will of voters.
All right, we got a question over here.
Quick question for Paul Dance. On this project 2025, how does the president or Kevin feel about remote working? Because we sure hate to move from Texas to the swamp.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to that question, and people come out differently. You have to understand it's a permanent government up there, and if you look geographically, the electorate is 95% blue. They vote Democrat, right? You look at the political contributions of the federal bureaucracy, 95%. So you're drawing from a pool of people who are already ideologically against you. So just temper, in the physical sense, when Trump, we did experiments with that, like Bureau of Land Management relocated it to Grand Junction, Colorado. Guess what? A lot of those people quit. They didn't want to make the trip. The first thing Biden really did was brought the people back to core. The reality is that thing, you're exactly right. It's built up over time, and they all have this kind of game. One spouse is in the government, the other person's out monetizing the inside information. They all connect in the social events. They know one another. So there is a big thing for separation. At the same time, though, we obviously want to bring people from outside of from America into Washington. That's what, Kevin, we call the Heritage Foundation is the outpost of America in Washington. Kevin brought that line out. But the reality is the federal workers now. They make $130,000 on average in D.C. Right? They get 20 days of annual leave after 5 years on the job, 13 federal holidays, three-legged retirement, a pension, 401k equivalent, and Social Security. It is a very nice feather nest for these folks. And get this, they're only coming into the office 3 days a month right now. They are all working remote.
How long has the pandemic been
the
over?
office buildings are 80% empty in places, and they had studies as recent as November that like 25% of the laptops in the Department of Interior were not even turned on in the month of November. So, the counter argument is, hey, they're not doing any damage, right? We're just paying them. Okay, well, the damage is $500 billion is what we're paying for this workforce. And, I think there's a Texas resident, a recent arrival, a guy who took over X maybe, and he went and got rid of 80%, and is still humming along. Yeah. So no one's ever right-sized the government. I think the short answer to your question is that it's just too big. There's not only 2.2 million federal workers, there's 17 million federal contractors. The reality is all the work is done by contractors. The federal government people just sit there at a desk and hand out the money to the contractors and vice versa. So we have to get a lot smarter about managing those contracts and the sort of stuff they put on the employees in those contractors, forcing you to get the jab, forcing you to adhere to various DEI regimen, whatever the case is. That by taking control of the personnel agencies, and I was the chief of staff at the end of the day at OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, which oversees this whole thing, we can make a big change. We will be obviously recruiting from across this fruited plain, and I think you have to make amendment to allow people to work somewhat remotely and have kind of schedules. But look, your forebears, many of you may have marched off to war and defended this country. You're going to have to kind of look at it in the same frame to make a sacrifice. My wife kicked me out the door. She said, I got the kids, go save the country. And I go up to Washington every week. It's not anything I want to do. We have young kids. But we all have to make the sacrifice, a little bit. So I think there will be a return to work for the federal government, and both literally and figuratively, but the thing has to change, and we have to bring in new blood.
Excellent point. Let me go back here in the back, and I'll come back up front.
Good day, everyone. Thank you, panel, for your expertise and your professionalism. My question is regarding something that was mentioned earlier as Commissioner Buckingham has said, we have a lot more people that came across the border than they're initially stating. And then also with the senator, I'm not sure if this has been done, but what challenges is the state of Texas making through the AG to challenge the numbers on the census as we talk about how that could affect representation at the federal level? Is that something that's been considered? Because I think that it would be a huge defraud against the state of Texas and all Americans. So has that been considered for the state of Texas to take that up?
I mean, my understanding, and Senator Hughes may be better, but I mean, that was a policy Trump had in place, that illegals not be counted. Within 12 hours of being sworn in, it's a policy that Biden completely reversed, along with so many of other Trump's policies. And so, I mean, that is, unfortunately, I do not believe the state has any say in who is counted in the census, because this is a federal entity. It is why change at the federal level is so incredibly important. Unless we're going to secede, which I'm going to be honest, I'm good with that.
We're making all kinds of news here today, y'all. We'll get the Senator. You want to jump in on that, or you want to go next question? Okay, great. All right, we had him right here.
So, two things quickly. One, we're supporters of both, well, of TPPF, AFPI, and Heritage. You said that there, and a bunch more. You said that there are 100 organizations working together on staffing for 2025. How is there not duplication of efforts? That's first.
Sure. And is there a second question?
Yes.
Oh.
The second one is, having sat through a lot of AFPI meetings where they talked about, including Trump himself in D.C., talking about how entrenched the bureaucracy is and how virtually impossible the years-long process to get anyone out. How are you going to get all these people in chairs?
Sure. Well, I mean, to recognize the power of your organization here, you've sent two of the leading people to Washington with both Brooke and Kevin. And, you know, what we're doing at Heritage with Project 2025 is really more of a complement to what they're doing at AFPI. We were very conscious about duplicating efforts, and that was part of our pitch, that we wanted to not only avoid duplication, but we also wanted to bring 21st century management to put all this in one place for the decision makers, right? So what we're doing is, and this, some of it varies from what AFPI is doing. We really are looking at personnel and building a major database, a conservative LinkedIn, asking all of our 100 partners to recommend people into that database. You know, TPPF sends us a list of names. We send out an email to them. You've been invited to join the database. Those people build a profile. In turn, later on, TPPF recommends people for various positions at the Census Bureau. And then we ask people to go through the Department of Commerce pile and second nominations and add it from across our coalition. All this is to build an eventually an organizational slate, org chart, that we can pass to the official transition team and say, this is who's favored, and you can look at maybe 3 people for a position and say, oh, TPPF recommended this person. They're liked by Heritage. Here's a good word. So that's to put all the information together in one. TPPF, you know, they're very policy driven. They have a lot of top level people from the Trump administration. I think ultimately these all these efforts are going to converge, and we're going to be grateful that some of them actually grew up independently. But I'd say, you know, there's a lot of cross-pollination. A lot of their people are working on ours, and vice versa. How do you get rid of them? Well, that's really the $64,000 question. You know, it's not, and you know, they go crazy. We kind of capture the imagination of the left. You know, they're all inveighing against Project 2025 because we've gotten over the target. The target is they've owned this whole thing. They built this federal bureaucracy for their own end. And now we're realizing how you turn the off switch of the place. And it is the personnel. You know, when the federal civil service was put into place, 1883. It came out of these, you know, the Teapot Dome scandal, the Tammany Hall, this whole spoils system. Well, 10% of the jobs were consecrated to those protections. Fast forward to today, 99.5% of the federal jobs are under that same rubric. All right, so the pendulum has gone completely to the other side where there is no political control. And that's unsustainable. So even the Democrats realize that things broken, and the liberals, and it will come back. The tools are actually, they're in place, but they need people who have the gumption and the verve to implement it. We're talking about the Census Bureau. Well, that's ultimately a group of bureaucrats, but there's a political appointee, and the people have to roll up their sleeves and manage it and do it correctly. So again, it all comes back to getting that person, one person, 5,000 of that one person, more than that, to come to Washington and do the job. And I would just, last thing is, like, how can you support it? Well, you guys, you have various bounties. God's been good to you. If you can't personally do it, you have to be supportive of the people who go to serve. So many are good people stay on the sidelines because they know when they come out of government, they're going to be completely chewed up and spit out. You have to hire a conservative. You have to stop buying from people who hate you. You have to mentor, nurture these folks. You find a winner, help them get to Washington, and tell them when they get back, they're going to have a life to live. So you can do a lot of good even just from your place in Texas.
And if I just super can add on to that. So funny talking to Rick Perry when he was Secretary of Energy and happening to be in D.C. and walk into his office. And he had literally a top echelon of 150 plus employees that had to go through Senate confirmation hearings. And so the Senate, and we have a very unique time in our U.S. Senate elections. So for the first time ever, we have about 6 senators in states that right now they're the only the U.S. Senate seat is the Democrat that's elected statewide. All their other statewides are Republicans. So we have the chance this election cycle to really take the Senate. That becomes incredibly important because the Democrats' ability to slow roll through approving the appointees and the people who are going to be running these agencies is a tremendous force. And so getting in that, and then the other thing that Trump almost got done right before the last election was it is almost impossible to fire these federal employees. And he had some major reforms. So those two things together, I think, are what's going to really help us if we can get it done.
All right, question over here.
Yeah. Yes, the Democrats seem to be controlled by the oligarchs like George Soros with their billions, so they don't really need to respond to the voice of the people. They are under obligation because of big bucks they're getting to respond to whoever's given those big bucks for their election. Could you comment what we can do about that?
Brought other candidates.
I mean, we have to. Obviously, the left has marched through all the cultural institutions, and money is, at the end of the day, you have to follow the money trail. I think, even within government, a lot of these non-governmental entities are extremely suspect. And again, like looking, at all the ability, a lot of this immigration or the real invasion policy is being run outside of government. So you got to just cut the spigot off. And how do you do that? You get in day one, and you have people like really go to town on a lot of these grants. This whole thing is sadly being paid for by you guys, and it's essentially right now it's a bank heist going on.
One factoid about the Soros money is that they are investing in Texas. They're putting hundreds of thousands of dollars to try and turn out non-voters in major Democrat counties. And so I looked at it, and the good news is that they basically wasted their money. There wasn't a huge uptick in voter turnout in some of these places. And so, if you want to spend your money and waste your money in Texas, come on down. We're happy with that. So,
can I say just one thing on that? Thank you so much. On the money, we see political contributions and we see how big they are. You hear some Democrats talking about dark money. If you look at dark money, they actually have a lot more on the Democrat side than the Republican side. But then look at money being spent by 501c3s, by so-called nonprofits. It dwarfs by magnitudes the political contributions. Check out a guy named Scott Walter, capitalresearch.org, CAPITAL research.org. Scott Walter has uncovered a lot of this money. Some of it's illegal, some of it's foreign, and we're going to be dealing with that. But we need to shine a light on this because there are billions being spent, completely unreported, unknown, and it's virtually all on the left.
All right, got a couple.
All right.
Time for a couple more questions.
First of all, I already have filled out the Project 25 form online, so.
Exciting, good.
And second of all, since the federal government is the stepchild of the states, and the Constitution limited the powers to the enumerated powers only, this is actually for Senator Hughes. Could we get a law passed in Texas that the Texas Supreme Court has the authority to rule whether or not any federal law meets the standard of the enumerated powers, and if it doesn't, then it's null and void in the state of Texas? Can we get that passed?
Yeah, the concept of nullification, it goes way back, and often it's associated with the Jim Crow South. It actually goes further than that. My goodness, the state of New York nullified fugitive slave laws that they didn't agree with, and so it's an old concept, and Jefferson wrote some about it, and Texas has done it to an extent. Look at the Real ID Act, which the feds tried to make us implement. We just said no. As a practical matter, we do say no to them a lot. It doesn't necessarily require declaration. We just don't comply. But yeah, it's an open question within the constitutional framework. You're right. There's enumerated powers. If they're outside those powers, they're not acting legitimately or legally. But it's an open question how far we can go with that. Texas has done that. We don't have to physically declare that, but things like the income tax, they collect the income tax from you and your employer directly. Texas is not in a position to stand in the way. So most of what the feds do, they're pretty sneaky, and they don't go through the state to get there. But when there are those federal actions that require the state government to be involved, you bet we have said no, and we should say no more. I totally agree.
All right. Down here? Yes, ma'am. Mike's coming.
Sorry.
You betcha.
It's a crowded room. What you said about the NGOs and the dark money they're putting in, I don't know if you know who Ben Bergram is, but he has highlighted that in Arizona and went into a way station that they set up out in the middle of the desert. And nobody was there at the time, and he went into one of the tents and filmed blankets with the Red Cross logo on them and Catholic Charities, both of which are supporting this, which I find highly offensive. So you're right, there's a lot of dark money out there, and it's coming from organizations that I was shocked to see. So.
Shameless plug for good journalism here, which is that unless someone's actually going to do the work to make certain that what's done in the dark comes into the light, that's going to continue to happen. And there's so much dark money that is spent. Washington, D.C. is awash in it. At Real Clear Politics, we looked into one gentleman named Hans-Georg Wyss. He's a Swiss billionaire who for the last 20 years, sometimes he was contributing directly to federal candidates. Other times he was washing his money through Arabella Advisors and others. But we did the research. We took a closer look into him. Turns out this gentleman is not a U.S. citizen. That is the type of thing that breaks federal law. And so, yeah, dark money is going to be there unless the Supreme Court changes its mind in a hurry. That's not going to happen. If you want to keep tabs on this, well, you got to pay someone to go do the work. So.
Senator Hughes, as you probably know, a lot of other states are basing legislation based on HB 20. And the lobbyists, some of whom appeared at your hearings, are flooding other states and in D.C., stating that there's nothing worse than a patchwork of legislation. Do you agree with that thinking?
That's one of the fallback positions, right? So HB 20, of course, is that bill that says big tech can't punish you for your free speech, for your viewpoint. And so when the bad guys can't stop a bill on policy, they say, oh, well, we don't want a patchwork. We don't want Texas to have different rules than other states. Yeah, actually we do. And thankfully, Texas is big enough that when we put rules in place, these big companies have to respond because we're such a big market. So you're right. That's one of the arguments they roll out. And I'll just say one more thing about big tech. I said they're buying the conservative movement. They are hiring up people that we know and look up to and respect, national figures who are on the conservative speaking circuit. Some of these people are now on the payroll of big tech. This is a serious threat.
So we got about 5 minutes left. I want to remind everybody that, of course, we're going to have the Lieutenant Governor is going to be speaking at lunch, and I can only imagine he always creates a headline when he comes to TPPF, so I'm super excited to see what he's going to say today. So, Terry, you'll have the last question, so take us home, make it spicy.
Okay, this is for Paul. Given your past experience with OPM, I'm surprised you have not mentioned either firing or nullifying the 8,000 SESers who are the senior management within the federal government, in addition to the 4,000 political appointees.
Right. The senior executive service, for those who don't know, was put in place by President Nixon, and the whole idea was there were going to be management gurus, Six Sigma types, who could oversee, procurement policy for the Parks Department as well as like DoD. They were interoperable. They weren't supposed to be subject matter experts. What happened was, over time, that is endemic of what happened at OPM. I'm an attorney by training. I had nothing to do with Washington. if anyone knows the Chevron Ecuador case, who was the guy who came up with the idea to get the outtakes? That was me. Okay, so the Texans, I helped save $27 billion for you guys, but I digress. But those people were really, that we were up against, were the progressives, right? They've taken over the government, and OPM is this nucleus where the power resides. Over time, we had come up with the idea of hands off the federal government, the civil service, and that office of the SES was being overseen by none other than a career bureaucrat, okay? And the person above that was an Obama holdover. I got in, it took me 2.5 years to get in the Trump administration, knocking on the door. I have 2 degrees from MIT. I did the Chevron case. I went to the University of Virginia, all this stuff. I'm just offering myself to basically work for free up there. Took me forever to get in. When I did get in, I was astounded at what was going on, like that our political appointees weren't even taking charge of the place. And I, by hook and by crook, got over to OPM. I had no experience in HR other than, hey, these are the people dump the papers on you day one and give you the stern talking to later on. I've got a little bit of authority problem myself here. But I got there and realized, why are these Obama holdovers running the thing? And I know we're short for time, but that had an incredible effect across the entire agency. The immigration stuff's being run by careers. Well, why is that a career? Because they're burrowed in, or it's career reserved. Well, who reserves it? The people at OPM. Well, who's making the reservation decision? The career bureaucrats. It's like, guys, we won. Elections have consequences. Run the thing. Go back to Reagan. These were all political appointees. So you make a change, the whole sea opens up, and that happens. So ultimately with SES, it's an important thing, but they have to be controlled, and we have to deconstruct it. But it involves someone going in there and just saying, no, I don't accept the status quo. Show me where in the statute that exists. And you have to be polite about it, but you have to be firm. And there's going to they're going to come at you, but we need this Texans spirit to kind of come up there and say, no, we're holding on. This is the Alamo. We're fighting it up there.
Excellent end to our program. Thank you all for being here and being with us. Please help me thank our panelists, and we'll be around for a little bit if you have any other questions. Thank you all so much. Thank you, guys.